Hello. This is either going to be a very short or long stream because I do have a number. I do actually have a list of things I want to talk about, but then I'm thinking of maybe dividing them into different streams because it's just better for the dissemination of the information to observe stream title discipline and stick to the subject. And so I think I'll first start by talking about how I prefer to convey my ideas and express myself, and actually the most efficient way is for people to ask me questions on Ask FM, and then I can quickly answer their questions without, through the formalities of the opening emails and social media and all that. And the advantage of that is also that you can be anonymous, because some of you might, be a little shy, or you want to ask offensive questions, or you're maybe a little embarrassed about how slowly you understand things and you're not sure and you want to ask things again and again in different ways, and so on and so forth. You'll all have your reasons, and I think probably the most efficient way is to get me through Ask FM. So you have the protection of your anonymity, and I have the convenience of quickly dealing with your questions. Now, I have noticed a kind of tailing off in my viewers, and I know this is my secondary channel, and I think, oh dear, it's because it's my secondary channel, and of course there's also this kind of boycott, but somebody else in my community was saying that his live viewers had also dropped significantly. So I don't know what's going on. I kind of have the feeling that somebody is interfering with my communications. So I'm not really sure. I don't know, but I'm going to soldier on anyway and hope that if I talk for long enough, enough people will come by, and maybe some of you will be wanting to bring others along so you have more fun, and it's not just the same old gang with their anti-Semitic abuse, although of course they're very welcome to come, because in a way I'm kind of dedicated my political activism, well, originally at them, and then I realised that they were hopeless, and that interestingly it was the other lot whom I should be targeting, i.e. mainstream politicians, the political establishment, the elite, because really the elite are the people who are in a position to change things, and I guess people are just fucked in the head. The government is fucked in the head. The governed are also fucked in the head, and that's their problem. That's why everything is going wrong. They can't think straight. But I'm here to help. So I'll just it's kind of hard to just talk to myself. I'm glad I had a few general topics in mind. Actually, they're not that general, they're quite specific. So really, I want to talk about questions and answers, and how they are probably more effective at making your point than using up your time to talk to another person, giving them a lecture. Lectures are boring, and particularly ones in which the other person is supposed to remain silent, because we know. I think the problem with people is that they find it very hard to keep quiet. People don't want to be just listening, because it reminds them of being at school, and of course children at school want to talk to each other, and even if what they say is basically nonsense, that's what they want to do, and I think that is really the danger of people now, undisciplined, uneducated people who have really not that much to say that is interesting or worthwhile, but they want to keep talking, and that is the reason why it is so unhelpful to allow these people to talk endlessly. But then I guess when you want an audience, you just maybe you overuse the time allotted to you. So you might be given an hour, and you think, oh, I have a whole hour to talk, and therefore I'm just going to just keep talking for an hour, not caring if you're boring your listener or anything, and in the end the talking, the words that you use will fall on deaf ears, or they will have fallen asleep if it's been really boring and long-winded, and what you want to do is give it to them hard and fast and make sure they remember what you just said. And this is actually more effective in a question, because a question is always shorter than an answer, and therefore quite a useful communication tool when you think about it. Because in our sort of ADHD times, people are really suffering from a short attention span. And if you want to communicate with them, you need to use up the time you have with them in the most efficient way possible. So I think that there is a kind of conspiracy going on with YouTube, maybe doing a kind of psyops to try and discourage us from just to be generally discouraging, and make us think we have fewer subscribers than we really have by deleting them as soon as they arrive, or by not showing them up when they're really in the chat, or it might be true that your subscribers have actually fallen and there's hardly anyone at all listening to you, and you're just talking to yourself in the abyss, not even receiving the usual words of abuse and and entertaining the usual gang of abusers. So there's that to contend with, and I suppose this segues nicely into my prepared topic of having faith. You see, just by talking about faith, I see that my number of viewers have raised to 2, and then it's gone back down to 1. So it's playing trick. Oh, it's gone back up to 2. Wow, it's doubled. So I think whoever you are who's watching and listening and going away and coming back again, it would be more fun if you participated and asked your members of your community to come and be with me and sit at my feet and listen to me and be entertained and informed by what I have to say to you. Because it is these abstract ideas that animals non-human animals don't know about, that are that represents a clear blue water between non-human animals and animals. And it is ideas, abstract ideas that you can't, that aren't material. And we arrive really at a realm of ideas, and Plato did go on about his ideas, his ideal forms. Frankly, I had no idea I was going to talk about this, because I particularly wanted to avoid the 2 topics that I was going to put in for a stream, but I have to be rambling on because I'm just wondering what's going to happen if my only viewer is just going to stay there, or there'll be 2. I don't know. You can make it more entertaining by interacting with me, by talking to me, by asking me questions and bringing your friends. And I don't know, perhaps you're, just one of those people hired to put me under surveillance, and obviously you're supposed to not encourage me by interacting with me and doing as I wish. And this brings me to the question, the philosophical question of whether you can actually observe something without causing it to change in some way. So I think perhaps what I should do now is have a good ramble about things that have happened to me online, and do a kind of we can review, I suppose. So, what have I discovered? I've been watching Millennial, as I have to. It's my job, really. I didn't watch every single one of it last year because I was rather busier for one reason or another. But yeah, yesterday I went through all of them and made notes on all of them, and basically I do it to compare my ideas with their ideas, and it's important to consider why my radical and world-changing ideas are being ignored, and how people, just can't bring themselves to discuss it. Certainly, Millennial Woes can't bring himself to discuss my ideas. Obviously, I'm not expecting praise and compliments all the time, but I do expect people to understand my very simple ideas and then react to it. And I see that I have, after talking for 15 minutes, raised my number of viewers to 3. And this reminds me of the story that I was telling you in previous streams about the rat experiment, of how these four, my goodness. So okay, this is now the time to tell you the story that I found in Psychology Today, after first hearing about it through somebody, through Hamza Yusuf, this Muslim scholar in Berkeley. So this experiment in faith in rats, it goes as follows. In the 1950s, Kurt Richter of the Johns Hopkins University conducted a gruesome experiment with domesticated and wild rats. He first took 12 domesticated rats, put them in jars half filled with water, and watched them drown. The idea was to measure the amount of time they swam before they gave up and went under. The first rat, Richter noted, swam around excitedly on the surface for a very short time, then dove to the bottom. Dove to the bottom, where it began to swim around, nosing its way along the glass wall. It died 2 minutes later. 2 more of the 12 domesticated rats died in much the same way, but interestingly, the 9 remaining rats did not succumb nearly so readily. They swam for days before they eventually gave up and died. Now came the wild rats, renowned for their swimming ability. The ones Richter used had been recently trapped and were fierce and aggressive. One by one, he dropped them into the water, and one by one, they surprised him. Within minutes of entering the water, all 34 died. What kills these rats? He wondered. Why do all of the fierce, aggressive wild rats die promptly on immersion, and only a small number of the similarly treated tame, domesticated rats? The answer, in a word: hope. The situation of these rats scarcely seems one demanding fight or flight. It is rather one of hopelessness, he wrote. The rats are in a situation against which they have no defence. They seem literally to give up. Richter then tweaked the experiment. He took other similar rats and put them in the jar. Just before they were expected to die, however, he picked them up, held them a little while, and then put them back in the water. In this way, he wrote, the rats quickly learned that the situation is not actually hopeless. This small interlude made a huge difference. The rats that experienced a brief reprieve swam much longer and lasted much longer than the rats that were left alone. They also recovered almost immediately. When the rats learned that they were not doomed, that the situation was not lost, that there might be a helping hand at the ready, in short, when they had a reason to keep swimming, they did. They did not give up, and they did not go under. After elimination of hopelessness, wrote Richter, the rats do not die. There are obviously many differences between humans and rats, but one similarity stands out. We all need a reason to keep swimming. So, this must point to the truth of organized religion, particularly those that worship the most powerful, the supreme and eternal Abrahamic God, and therefore, even if you don't believe in God, you should obey his laws because they make sense in practical humanistic terms, because I think most of the laws in the Quran can be explained as bringing about a benefit to society, unless you can think of one that doesn't. So it would be good if you could find a reason to, a law particularly, to say, well, this one makes no sense at all, and then you can ask me about it, and I might be able to give you the reason for its wisdom, or I might not. This is a challenge I would like to be put under. But yeah, I've been noticing this thing about my notifications lately. There just seems to be, just a sense of being rigged, and I don't think it's just because of the boycott or anything. I don't know, are there that many people who want to boycott me? If they want to boycott me, well, it's live. They might come back later, in spite of themselves, because they're curious. Or whatever, or perhaps they haven't received a notification, or perhaps the only 2 people watching now are, YouTube employees or deep state employees. So it's difficult to judge. But the thing is to, keep on trucking, and that's what I intend to do. Because you always see that there's some, little thing that changes, which may be ultimately useful or not, but you have to keep, going to the bitter end, I suppose, if you really believe in your cause, and I do believe that good will triumph over evil, reason over lunacy, and even if one does not live to see it, one will be remembered in the history books. If not immediately, then eventually. So again, I ask you to open an account on Ask.fm and ask me any questions that you are not clear about with regard to secular Quranism, or perhaps any problem you might have. I am known for my great wisdom, and perhaps I could help you in other ways that are nothing to do with politics. Perhaps that is probably the best way of making me seem more cuddly, in that I could be your agony aunt. So I think that's all I have to say. I was going to talk about usury, but this is one of my repeat subjects, but I just want to mention that Black Pigeon Speaks, who now calls himself Felix Rex, I think, now has said something about usury, saying that it is not just the West that is going to burn itself up in usury. It's going to happen to the Chinese too, who are sitting on a very, very big bubble of credit indeed, and their credit is kind of contaminating the West, because a lot of Communist Party officials who might have got their ill-gotten gains and believe also that the credit bubble is going to burst in China are just going to take the money and invest it outside China. And this is the thing about obeying the laws of God. You may know that the Chinese, a long time ago, as long ago as the Song dynasty, invented paper money, and predictably they just couldn't stop themselves. It's very, very tempting, once you can create money out of thin air, to keep doing it until your economy goes bust. And basically that's what the Chinese did. So even though they were the first to have invented paper money, they also got their fingers burnt. But they're doing it again with their fractional reserve banking. And they just can't stop themselves. And so, you also have to remind yourself that Hitler too wanted to abolish usury. Those of you who've read Mein Kampf will know that he really, really, really wanted to abolish it. To the extent that Hitler thought that the stock exchange was a kind of international casino, and he wanted to abolish that too. But when he became, and that was of course before he came to power, and when he was in power, he just wanted to conquer Europe, and he obviously needed to fund his imperial wars through usury, and so he couldn't, in the end, make himself do it. But you have to think of what could have happened if Hitler had been, for example, a good Muslim. Okay, it probably wasn't politic of him to, say, announce, as John Vance has done, that he's going to convert to Islam. But what he could have done, because the Catholic Church and Christianity was still very strong in those days, was basically to follow the rules of the Quran, but not announce the fact that he was doing it. So he could have been practicing a kind of secular Quranism during the time of Nazi Germany, including even putting Jews on a register, but obviously, so he didn't have to expel them or hurt them in any way. And I think it probably would have worked for Hitler if he did all the things that I propose, and then he would have, made Germany great and all, without, going against the divine law that protects Jews, because it's kind of saying, really, that Gentiles who worship the Abrahamic God, basically they're not allowed to hurt Jews for being Jews. And the Quran also actually says this, saying, people of the book, i.e. Jews and Christians, will have a special status, because Islam is a synthesis of Judaism and Christianity, with all the bad bits and inconvenient bits taken out, to all kind of slimline, and I think it would have worked. But I think the trouble with Hitler was he just couldn't wait. In the same way that Napoleon couldn't wait. It was all war, war, war. It's got to be done in my lifetime, so I get the glory. And he overshot the limits. He strayed off the right path, and defeat and disaster and suicide was the consequence. So go, and yeah, I know people are obsessed with Jews, but we should really, go back to the the Torah and Moses, and remind ourselves that Moses himself did not reach the promised land. He died and was buried in an unmarked grave. And there's just a hint in the Torah that he committed some sin, or his generation committed some sin that meant he couldn't, get the full glory of leading his people out of Egypt and to the promised land in his own lifetime. So this is something to bear in mind. Does it matter? Does it matter that you can't get all the glory? Well, I guess we should know our limits. Now, talking about knowing our limits and Hitler who didn't, we should think back to a time when a German chancellor did know his limits, and he was, of course, Otto von Bismarck, who had limited aims, who only wanted to unify Germany, and stopped after that. After he thought, well, I've just united all the German lands. I've got Austria, I've got... I've united, Austria with Germany, the main German-speaking peoples, and we've defeated France, so we are, the most powerful continental European power. That was enough for him. Admittedly, Bismarck fell out of favour when he couldn't agree with the new Kaiser about a whole bunch of things, because the new Kaiser was a little more belligerent and adventurous and wanted a fight with the British, and he had a few issues himself with his shriveled arm, and and he probably had a traumatized childhood, and that kind of upset the balance of power in Europe in the end, which is but the thing is, we all have our foibles, and maybe we'd had abusive childhoods and stuff, but I think what could save us is agreeing to obey the rules, so we don't go crazy with our irrational, emotional, immoral preferences. And obviously it helps if the rules are written clearly, and I really do believe that we have this book of rules in the Quran, and the only thing that is preventing Western intellectuals from looking at it rationally and impartially is because they have gone crazy with arrogance and ignorance too, or they're too afraid to stick their necks out because they're thinking in the short term, in that they think in the short term, if I am seen to be talking to Claire or agreeing with Claire, I'm going to get into trouble and I'll be treated as a political pariah, so I'm not going to risk it. And the thing is, you have to remember that, nothing, no pain, no gain, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And the whole idea of faith is to give us the courage to embark on onerous and great undertakings. Do I make myself clear? Can I be easily understood even by the neurotic and uneducated? I think I express myself too clearly, and I think that is really the problem. So I won't be disheartened by the 3 or 4 people watching now, because I know the rule is that if your stream is any good, the ultimate number of people watching your stream will be the people who watch it after the stream has been complete. And what what makes people have faith is, of course, their belief. So, back to the story of the rats. The rats that died very quickly were the ones who were so frightened and so emotional, i.e. the wild rats who could swim, but they just didn't because they were so frightened, by by the trauma of being captured and being put in a jar, and they, probably just had a heart attack and couldn't swim anymore, even if they wanted to, because they were so frightened. And maybe the domesticated rats were more accustomed to, being handled by humans, so they kind of trusted in humans, even though the humans could be quite cruel, but, that's all they knew. And the fact was that they, because of previous experiences, they believed that they might just be helped again this time. So they hung on for a bit longer in order to be rescued. And thereby they gave us the example to be extracted, so those rats are an example of how faith can make us go on for longer, running on empty, that kind of Hanukkah thing, so that we're more likely to hang in there and therefore be still alive when we are finally rescued. So there is a purpose to religion, and therefore there is a purpose to God. And even if God was merely a figment of the imagination of clever, ambitious, imaginative men, wise men, even so, the idea of the Abrahamic God is in itself divine, because it encompasses so many things, and is probably single-handedly more responsible for the advancement of civilization than any single scientific idea. Because not only does it instill, does belief in a perfectly moral and omnipotent and omniscient God give the individual faith, it also creates what is called the rule of law. And the rule of law is, well, it should ideally, be the rule of God's law, because every society needs a system of rules so that members of that society can obey, in order to make that society function with greater efficiency, and thereby rival and supersede others who don't quite organize themselves so well. So there is, in a way, a kind of Darwinian survival of the fittest religion. And this would apply even if the whole world were to adopt secular Quranism. Because what would happen if every country in the whole wide world adopted secular Quranism would be that each would have, their own wise guys thinking, this stuff about not eating pork, we don't want it. So basically what I'm saying is everyone, not everyone, but there will be people interpreting the Quran all over the world in their different nations with varying capacity to comply with it. So what they'll do is they'll cherry pick verses they like and ignore ones that they don't, and this will, be the eternal problem of people interpreting the Quran. I mean, I'd say I will make a point of interpreting the Quran as literally and as accurately and as humanely and as reasonably as I can, but I'm only mortal and fallible. I can only say that this is what I want to do. Perhaps I won't, if push comes to shove. I admit my my human fallibility, but all I can say is I promise to do that, and you can hold me to my promise if you notice that I'm not interpreting the Quran in a way that is in conformity with a literal interpretation of it and a truth, as well as a humane and reasonable interpretation of it. So what I'm saying is that even if the whole world adopted secular Quranism, there will be different interpretations of it, and I think the one that interprets it in the way that is most in conformity with truth, logic, and morality, or if you prefer, the approval of the Abrahamic God, they will be the nation that is most successful and therefore will become the top dog nation of the future. So you can imagine the Chinese, they'll probably completely ignore the the requirement to not gamble, because it's a very Chinese sin, very much a Chinese vice. They'll probably ignore the one not to eat pork. But we'll see how they fare. But they'll probably think, oh, we Chinese, we've been around for so long, we don't need to, we can ignore a few rules here and there, and it will be up to them. Who knows? They might, be decimated by some outbreak of swine flu or something of that nature. Who knows? Or it might never happen. Provided they cook their pork properly and observe good standards of animal health. Who knows? But this is what I think should happen. If people, if I get what I want and I get global adoption of secular Quranism. So I'm already, pointing out to you that I do not foresee or even expect people all over the world in their different nations to be interpreting the Quran in the way that I would interpret it. And for all I know, you might be right, and I'm interpreting it wrong, but only time will tell. But I think what we can all agree on is that living under a matriarchy is disgraceful and insufferable and must be addressed as soon as possible. And if men are collectively too cowardly to even consider doing this, talking about that, then there is, something, gravely wrong with their what's the word am I looking for? Well, their conscience. They clearly don't have a conscience, so they have no moral fibre, no moral fortitude, and therefore they can't do what men are supposed to do, which is to fight for what they believe in. But then, how can they fight for what they believe in if they don't believe in anything, if they are, to a man, atheists and nihilists, only concerned for their pleasure, their immediate short-term pleasure, and of course, cattle do not deserve to live in a civilization. And could it possibly be true that there's not 10 honourable, influential men in the West or in any Western country capable of getting, cooperating with each other to defenestrate the matriarchy that we are all oppressed by? Because the matriarchy is not only a danger to the patriarchy, but to itself. I haven't quite finished, so I will mute my phone. So the idea is really that men are supposed to fight. Yep, they're supposed to fight for their convictions, and their convictions would come from their moral principles, and their moral principles would come from their religion. And unfortunately, liberalism is not a moral system. Okay, you can call it a rule system, but it is a rule system that promotes a matriarchy, and we know it's a matriarchy because a matriarchy, as I define it, is a society where the overwhelming majority of the people ignore the rules of marriage, and we can objectively measure this by looking at the illegitimacy rate. So if there are more unmarried parents than there are married parents, then you know that you are a matriarchy, and a matriarchy is a primitive, declining, extinct, or soon to be extinct society where the rule of law is breaking down. And that is something to consider. I've just got a Hangout link. Presumably it's for me to join the Fratelli d'Europa live stream that's going on. But the thing is, I'm actually quite hungry, so I'll probably have something to eat. And I know you're all there. I think that's why you're not here. But that's okay. You can always come back later and post all your comments and abuse in in the chat. So you can do that. Okay, yeah, matriarchy. Let me just finish off here. So a matriarchy is a danger to itself, because in the end it will just do these crazy stupid things that will end up creating this parasitic class that will first consume all that is productive within that society. And the parasitic class would be the lower classes and also the upper classes. And eating away at the productive core in the middle, and then eventually they'll have to consume each other, devour each other, because that's how they operate. It's cannibalism, not very nice, until they're so weak and degenerate that other societies that don't practice their degenerate practices will just come in and take all their stuff, and that's how it's always worked, I think. And it's very sad that that there's so many philosophy departments all over the Western world, with and their academia is stuffed full of philosophers, jobless philosophers, and they can't discuss all these basic terms with me because they're moral cripples, incapable of using truth, logic, and morality to solve and avoid problems. And this is all I have to say on the matter. Thank you for listening, those of you who have, and those of you who will after the stream is complete. And don't forget to ask me questions on Ask FM, because it's the most efficient way of understanding my ideas. So thank you again for your attention.